Every war in the last 150 years has one invisible participant. Not a general, not a president, not an ideology. Every border on your map.
It took 300 million years to make, and just 150 years to weaponize.
This is the ledger. It doesn't choose sides. It only watches. And it has watched every deal, every war, every lie told in the name of energy.
These aren't nations. These are mining operations. These aren't governments. These are supply chain managers. And these aren't citizens. These are resources. Coal built empires. But coal was visible, mineable locally, controllable. One nation's coal stayed with that nation. Oil would change that forever. Empires fought over what they could see, but nobody noticed the liquid beneath their feet that would become more valuable than gold, diamonds, or land itself. For 300 years, power meant controlling oceans, navies, fleets, but a single tanker ship would change that equation forever. The Ottoman Empire didn't collapse because they lost wars. They collapsed because the world stopped needing their trade routes. A new fuel was rising, and they had no access to it. November 1859. Oil was discovered in Pennsylvania. Nobody celebrated. Nobody understood. In 60 years, it would rewrite every border, every alliance, and every law of war. The transition was silent. No announcements, no ceremonies. Quietly, invisibly, power moved from underground rocks to liquid beneath the sand, and the world's geography would never be the same. One man controlled 90% of American oil refining. He wasn't a general, he wasn't a king, but he had more power than both. Because energy is not negotiable. Energy is survival. The story was told carefully. Oil wasn't about control. Oil was about freedom, progress, a car in every garage, a nation on wheels, the greatest marketing campaign ever created. By 1900, governments and oil companies were no longer separate entities. They became a single organism, an organism that would shape every conflict for the next 150 years. World War I was the first war ever fought where energy logistics mattered more than soldier count. For the first time in human history, armies could run out of fuel before they ran out of soldiers. Britain converted its entire navy from coal to oil. A gamble, a risk, but it gave them speed, efficiency, and range. And it made Middle Eastern oil more strategic than any mountain or fortress. The Ottoman Empire controlled Middle Eastern oil. The British wanted it. But the Ottoman Empire was falling apart. So Britain made a choice: support Arab rebellion against the Ottomans in exchange for oil access. They sent a man named Lawrence to organize Arab rebellion. The official story was about freedom. The real story was about oil pipelines. This is the moment the modern Middle East was born, not from independence, but from energy contracts. The Sykes-Picot Agreement carved up the Middle East between Britain and France. But these weren't random lines. These were pipeline routes, oil infrastructure. The borders were drawn to serve energy, not people. For the first time, generals had to think like mathematicians. Distance equals fuel consumed. Fuel equals oil availability. An army wasn't limited by courage or numbers. It was limited by the barrel count in supply lines. Gallipoli was planned as a military victory.
But oil supply disruption turned it into a massacre. Thousands died, not because they were outgunned, but because their ships had no fuel to retreat. The Ottoman Empire didn't lose World War I because it lost battles. It lost because it no longer controlled the world's energy supply. Empires that don't control oil don't survive modernity. After World War I, the victors didn't just win land. They won energy security for the next 100 years, and those without it would spend the next century fighting to get it.
Germany had steel, it had coal, it had industry, but it had zero oil reserves. Hitler knew this. Every military plan he made was based on a single desperate thought: invade the Soviet Union and seize its oil fields.
Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union wasn't about ideology. Every general knew the truth. This war was about oil. Lose access to Soviet oil, lose the war. Gain access, win it. That simple. Stalingrad wasn't about pride or ideology. It was about holding the last major oil refinery on the Eastern Front. Every soldier who died there died fighting for fuel, not for the fatherland, for gasoline. Japan faced the same crisis. No oil, no way to produce it, embargoed by the West. Japan had one choice: invade oil-rich Southeast Asia. Pearl Harbor wasn't an act of ideology. It was an act of survival desperation.
The entire Pacific War was a chess game played with oil. Japan attacking oil-producing regions, America destroying Japan's tanker fleet. The side that could fuel its machines would win. The other would starve. The Allies didn't just bomb cities for morale damage. They systematically destroyed Axis oil refining capacity. Ploiești refinery. Synthetic oil plants in Germany. When refineries burned, armies stopped moving. Germany tried creating synthetic oil from coal, a technological marvel, but impossibly expensive. They couldn't produce enough. The math was simple. They needed Soviet oil fields or they would lose the war. By 1943, Germany's fate was sealed, not by Russian generals, by lack of oil. Tanks without fuel, planes without jet fuel, ships without bunker oil. An entire empire starved of energy and watching its machines slow to a stop. After World War II, every military strategist knew one thing: never fight a war where your enemy controls the oil supply. Because fuel, not bullets, decides wars. And this lesson would shape every conflict that followed. By the 1930s to 1950s, massive oil reserves were discovered across the Middle East: Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Kuwait. These nations possessed more oil wealth than any nation in history. By right, they should have become the world's most powerful. But here's the problem they faced. They had the resource, but not the technology. No refineries, no tankers, no global distribution networks. So they made contracts, terrible one-sided contracts, contracts that would haunt them for decades. Oil concessions gave Western companies 50 to 70% of profits. The host countries got the remaining 30 to 50%. But they also got all the environmental damage, all the political instability, and all the dependence on foreign companies. Paradoxically, oil wealth didn't make these nations powerful. It made them dependent. They became wealthy, but Western nations controlled the technology, the markets, and, most importantly, the military bases protecting those oil fields. Western media created a narrative. Arab nations were too primitive to manage oil themselves. They needed Western guidance, Western companies, Western military protection.
The psychological trick worked perfectly. Victims believed they were incompetent. Protection agreements were signed. In exchange for military security, oil prices stayed favorable to the West. In exchange for foreign soldiers on their soil, oil wealth flowed outward, the definition of occupied sovereignty.
Foreign companies paid the host governments paid themselves. The ordinary people whose land contained the oil saw almost nothing. Oil wealth became a tool for oppressing your own population.
A new generation grew up watching foreign companies extract their wealth, watching soldiers from other nations protect foreign interests, watching their own leaders become rich collaborators. The resentment built in silence. It had nowhere to go.
In 1973, the Yom Kippur War began. But during this war, something unprecedented happened. Arab nations realized they had a weapon more powerful than tanks. They had oil, and they decided to use it as a weapon.
OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, called an oil embargo against nations supporting Israel. Simple action, radical consequence. The world's largest economies faced immediate oil shortages. Oil prices went from $3 a barrel to $12 a barrel overnight. This sounds like a number, but it meant inflation, economic chaos, unemployment, poverty, all triggered by oil supply reduction. Western societies faced something they'd never experienced: scarcity. Gas lines appeared. Rationing began. Industries shut down. For the first time, nations realized we are not in control. Oil is. The embargo triggered the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. But this time, everyone could trace the cause back to oil, to a decision made thousands of miles away, to a weapon they never expected. This embargo created a permanent psychological shift in Western consciousness, the idea of scarcity, the fear that another nation could strangle your economy without firing a single shot. Oil had proven it was not just energy, it was power. After the 1973 embargo, U.S. military doctrine changed fundamentally. The Middle East became declared as a zone of vital national interest. Military intervention in oil-rich regions became policy. From this moment on, oil security meant military presence. The message was clear. Oil is a strategic military resource. Nations will go to war to control it. The price is worth it. The embargo taught the world this lesson, and the world accepted it as inevitable. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, Saddam Hussein seized control of 1/5 of the world's oil supply. This wasn't a regional dispute. This was a global energy crisis, and the world responded with overwhelming military force. The official reason for intervention was Kuwait's independence. The real reason? Protecting Saudi Arabia's oil fields from Iraqi control. Control over the Gulf meant control over global energy. That was non-negotiable. During Kuwait's liberation, hundreds of oil wells were set on fire by retreating forces, not as military strategy, as a message. If we can't have it, nobody has it. Oil wells burning for months. Economic damage measured in billions. Operation Desert Storm was the first war fully televised globally. It looked like a military victory. It was actually an energy security operation. Every captured position meant oil field protection. Every casualty was the cost of energy control. After the war, Iraq faced devastating sanctions. These sanctions prevented oil exports, preventing oil revenues, preventing economic recovery. Iraq was punished not just militarily, but economically, by controlling its oil access.
20 years later, the Iraq War was fought again. This time, documents later revealed that American and British companies were already negotiating oil contracts before the war began. The war was not about weapons, it was about future access. The cost? Over 1 million lives, millions displaced, countries destabilized for decades, all so global oil supplies remained accessible to wealthy nations. The economics of oil require this human cost. Defense contractors don't just profit from war. They profit from the need for oil security. They profit from military bases. They profit from weapons sales. They are financially invested in permanent conflict over oil. The system works perfectly. Oil generates wealth. That wealth funds military power. Military power secures oil fields. Oil profits fund wars. Wars justify military spending. The cycle never breaks, because breaking it means less profit. The wealthiest oil-producing nations buy the most advanced weapons from Western nations. But those weapons create dependency. You need spare parts, maintenance, upgrades, all supplied by the seller. Weaponry is permanent economic colonization. Sanctions work by restricting oil sales. No oil sales equals no government revenue, equals inability to pay for imports, equals economic collapse. Sanctions are oil-based warfare that kills civilians through poverty without needing soldiers. The question is not when oil ends. The question is, what will humanity choose to control next?